The dinner rush was in full swing. The kitchen a symphony of sizzling pans, clinking plates, and shouted orders. Steam curled through the air as I plated the final touch on a dish, pan-seared salmon, glistening under a perfect beurre blanc sauce. Then, just as I handed the plate to a server, a shrill, entitled voice sliced through the chaos like a dull, rusted knife. "You need to stop what you're doing right now. You have no right to be working here." The entire kitchen froze. Every server, every cook, every busboy turned toward the source of the interruption. Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, standing at the threshold of my kitchen, her arms crossed, her face twisted in the smug certainty of someone who thought she ruled the world. I wiped my hands on my apron, barely suppressing a groan. Not this again. Love seeing entitled people get what they deserve. Subscribe for more crazy stories like this. "What do you need, Karen?" I asked, already knowing whatever it was would be ridiculous. "You," she spat, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. "You need to leave. Immediately. You can't work in this restaurant anymore." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I chuckled dryly. "Karen, I own this restaurant. I'm the head chef. You have no authority here." Her eyes narrowed. "That's where you're wrong. This neighborhood is under my jurisdiction. As HOA president, I make the rules, and I say that business owners cannot live on the same property as their business." I blinked. "First of all, that's not even close to being true. Second, this building isn't even part of the HOA. Her lips curled in distaste. "It should be. It ruins the integrity of the neighborhood. We don't need your kind of establishment, bringing in riffraff." I inhaled sharply, my fingers tightening around the edge of the stainless steel counter. I had worked for years to build this place. Blood, sweat, and too many sleepless nights had gone into turning this old building into something special. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was my dream, my home, and this power-hungry suburban tyrant thought she could march in here and demand I shut it down. I shook my head. "Karen, you need to leave. Now. You're trespassing." Her face reddened like a boiling pot ready to explode. "You think you can talk to me like that? I have connections, Daniel. Important people. If you don't shut this place down yourself, I will make it happen." I scoffed. "Oh, really? And how exactly do you plan on doing that?" Her smirk sent a chill down my spine. "Let's just say, I know how to make life very, very difficult for you." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking ominously against the tile floor. A beat of silence hung in the air before my sous chef, Marco, exhaled and muttered, "Jesus." What crawled up her HOA and died? A nervous chuckle rippled through the kitchen, but my gut twisted with unease. Karen wasn't just throwing a tantrum. She was making a threat, and I had a sinking feeling she wasn't bluffing. The storm started 2 days later. First, it was a sudden wave of health inspections. 3 in 1 week. Unannounced. All of them triggered by anonymous complaints about unsanitary conditions. Of course, I passed with flying colors, but the disruption slowed service and cost me money. Then came the parking complaints. HOA members, people who didn't even live near my building, filed bogus grievances, claiming my customers were taking up residential spots. Never mind that I had my own dedicated parking lot. But the real kicker? The online attacks. Karen had somehow orchestrated a smear campaign, rallying a group of HOA diehards to flood my restaurant's Yelp and Google reviews with fake complaints. Suddenly, we had 1-star ratings from people claiming they got food poisoning, that the service was rude, that they saw rats in the kitchen. Business plummeted. Loyal customers still came, but new reservations? Cut in half. Walk-ins? Almost non-existent. And when I checked my restaurant's social media, I found Karen leading a neighborhood Facebook group called Take Back Our Community. Her latest post? A full-on call to boycott my business. I gritted my teeth as I scrolled through the ridiculous accusations. This restaurant is an eyesore. bringing in unruly customers and disrupting our peaceful neighborhood. We need to send a message that we won't tolerate businesses that don't respect HOA values. And the worst one, the owner doesn't even belong here. He's a squatter in his own building. I clenched my fists. This wasn't just Karen being a nuisance anymore. She was actively trying to destroy my livelihood. "Boss," Marco said, stepping into my office. "We just had another cancellation. They said they saw something about us online." I let out a slow breath. "That's it. I've had enough." Marco raised an eyebrow. "You got a plan?" I nodded. "Oh yeah. If Karen wants a fight, she's about to find out exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong chef." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating against my nightstand. Again, another unknown number, another missed call. I already knew who was behind it. "Karen," I groaned, rubbing my face before finally checking my voicemail. "Daniel, this is your final warning. The HOA has made it clear that you need to stop operating immediately. I suggest you comply before things get worse for you. Consider this your last chance." I let out a slow breath. Worse, she had already cost me customers, flooded my business with fake negative reviews, and sent bogus complaints to every city agency that would listen. What else could she possibly do? The answer came faster than I expected. By noon, my restaurant was surrounded by city inspectors, health department, zoning board, even the fire marshal. All at once. I didn't need to ask why. "Anonymous complaints," the fire marshal muttered as he checked my kitchen's ventilation system. "Gotta tell you, pal, this is the 4th time we've been called out here in 2 weeks. You sure you don't have any enemies?" Oh, I had one, and she had a name. Karen Whitmore. I stood with my arms crossed as the inspectors scoured my restaurant from top to bottom, checking every inch of my kitchen, my storage, my fire exits, my fully up-to-code, legally compliant business. Nothing was out of order, yet they still took their time, stretching what should have been a routine check into an all-day disruption. Customers were turned away. Staff stood around, waiting. By the time the last inspector left, we had lost nearly an entire day's revenue. And then, as if she had planned it for theatrical effect, Karen showed up. She stood just outside, hands on her hips, a victorious smirk on her face as I walked out to confront her. "What did I tell you?" she said smugly. "It was only a matter of time before the authorities shut you down." I clenched my jaw. "They didn't shut me down, Karen. They found nothing. Because unlike you, I actually follow the law." Her smirk twitched, but she quickly recovered. "For now. But I wouldn't get too comfortable. It's only a matter of time before you're forced out. The HOA won't stand for this." I exhaled through my nose. "Karen, for the last time, I am not part of your HOA." Her lips curled, as if the very fact infuriated her. "We'll see about that." And with that, she turned and strutted away. I should have felt relieved. The inspections were over. My restaurant was still standing, and Karen hadn't won. But I didn't, because I knew she wasn't done. That night, my personal phone number was leaked. I didn't realize it at first, but then my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Blocked numbers, unknown callers. And when I finally picked up, "You're ruining our neighborhood. Your restaurant is a disgrace. Shut it down before we shut it down for you." Some messages were worse. Nasty, threatening. I gripped my phone, my stomach twisting. Karen had done this. And the worst part, it worked. Customers who had been coming here for years started canceling reservations. Not because they believed the lies, but because they didn't want the drama. "We love your place, Daniel," one couple told me regretfully, "but we just don't want to get involved in all this mess. It's too much stress." I forced a smile, thanked them for their support, but inside, I was furious. Karen was winning. She wasn't just harassing me. She was making people afraid to support my business. And that was unforgivable. So I did what any rational business owner would do. I called my lawyer. Harassment, defamation, business interference. We have plenty to work with, my lawyer, Julia, said as she flipped through the pile of evidence I had gathered. Screenshots of Karen's posts, recordings of the harassing phone calls, reports from the multiple inspections. But it's not just about legal action. You need to fight back publicly. I nodded. I had already started making plans. If Karen wanted a war, I was done playing defense. The next morning, I made a call to a local journalist, someone who had covered small business struggles before. By that evening, an article was live. Local restaurant owner faces harassment from HOA president. Is this abuse of power? The story detailed everything. The false complaints, the fake reviews, the smear campaign, the threats, and it went viral. People started flooding my restaurant with support. My real customers left glowing reviews to combat the fake ones. Social media turned against Karen. And then, because karma has a way of working fast, someone leaked her HOA financial records. Turns out, Karen had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, lavish dinners, spa treatments, even a weekend getaway. The HOA board, they were livid. And as for me, I wasn't done yet. Because if Karen thought this was over, she had no idea what was coming next. The fallout from the article hit faster than I expected. By the next morning, Karen's name was everywhere. Neighbors who had quietly endured her reign as HOA president suddenly found their voices. She fined me $500 because my garden gnome was too whimsical. She threatened to tow my car for parking in front of my own house. She made me repaint my fence because the color wasn't neighborhood appropriate. One by one, people came forward, sharing stories of Karen's petty power trips and underhanded tactics. What had once been whispered complaints turned into a public reckoning. But Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. That afternoon, just as we were preparing for the dinner rush, she marched back into my restaurant, her face flushed with anger, her eyes blazing. This time, she didn't bother with fake politeness. "How dare you drag my name through the mud like that?" she hissed, jabbing a finger toward me. "You think you can humiliate me and get away with it?" I wiped my hands on a dish towel, keeping my voice calm. "Karen, you did that to yourself. You harassed me, lied about my business, and tried to destroy my livelihood. All I did was tell the truth." Her jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought she might actually scream. Instead, she leaned in close, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. "You think this is over? You have no idea who you're dealing with." I raised an eyebrow. "Neither do you." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her, but I could still feel the tension lingering in the air. Marco walked over, shaking his head. "She's unhinged, man. You sure you want to keep pushing her buttons?" I gave a small, grim smile. "I don't need to push anymore. She's doing all the work for me." Sure enough, Karen's next move was as predictable as it was desperate. The following morning, I woke up to find that someone had plastered flyers all over the neighborhood, flyers with my face on them. "Beware of this man," the bold, red text read. "He is destroying our community." It was laughably over the top, but it didn't stop there. The flyer went on to accuse me of everything from illegal business practices to bringing crime into the neighborhood. By noon, Karen was back on the neighborhood Facebook page, posting wild conspiracy theories about how I had bribed the inspector and manipulated the media to cover up my supposed crimes. But this time, no one was buying it. The comments under her posts were brutal. "Karen, maybe it's time you step down. You've done enough damage. Didn't you get caught using HOA funds for your personal expenses? Maybe focus on explaining that instead. Leave the restaurant guy alone. His food is amazing, and you're just embarrassing yourself at this point." Within hours, her post was deleted, but the damage was done. Karen's iron grip on the HOA was slipping, and everyone could see it. Meanwhile, my restaurant was thriving again. The negative reviews were drowned out by an influx of real customers, eager to show their support. Our reservations were booked solid for weeks, and the energy in the dining room was electric. But I wasn't done yet, because while Karen was busy imploding, I had been quietly gathering one last piece of leverage, something that would make sure she never messed with me or anyone else again. It started with a conversation I had with one of my regulars, an older gentleman named Mr. Thompson. He had been on the HOA board for years, but had recently stepped down due to health issues. "Daniel," he said one evening after dinner, "do you know why Karen has been president for so long?" I shook my head. "Because no one else wanted the job?" He chuckled. "That's part of it. But mostly, it's because she's been manipulating the election process. She's been collecting proxy votes from elderly residents who don't even realize what they're signing. It's how she stayed in power all these years." My jaw tightened. "Is there any way to prove it?" He smiled. "Funny you should ask. I've kept records." And just like that, I had the final piece of the puzzle. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Word had spread that something big was about to happen, and people packed the community center, eager to see what would unfold. Karen sat at the front of the room, trying to look composed, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She knew she was losing control. And then, just as the meeting was about to start, Mr. Thompson and I walked in. The room fell silent. "Mr. Thompson," Karen said, forcing a smile. "What a surprise. I didn't think you'd be attending." He smiled back, but there was steel in his eyes. I wouldn't miss it for the world. As the meeting progressed, Karen tried to maintain her usual dominance, shutting down anyone who dared to question her. But when it came time to discuss the upcoming HOA elections, Mr. Thompson stood up. "I'd like to make a motion," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "A motion to review the past 5 years of election results." Karen's face went pale. "That's unnecessary," she said quickly. "Everything has been done by the book." "That's interesting," I said, standing up beside him, "because we have evidence that says otherwise." I held up a stack of documents, Mr. Thompson's records, detailing every shady proxy vote Karen had collected. The room erupted. People shouted, demanded answers, and within minutes, the board voted unanimously to remove Karen as president pending a full investigation. As she stumbled out of the meeting, her face a mask of shock and humiliation, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time, Karen had finally been held accountable. And this time, there was no escaping it. Karen didn't go quietly. Even after she was voted out as HOA president, she tried to spin the narrative. She claimed she was a victim of a smear campaign, that the election review was rigged, that I had manipulated everyone into turning against her. But the truth was out. The financial discrepancies, the fraudulent proxy votes, the abuse of power. It was all laid bare. No one was falling for her lies anymore. That didn't stop her from trying. One night, just after closing, I stepped outside to lock up, only to find my restaurant had been vandalized. Red spray paint covered my front windows. "Thief! Liar! Get out!" I clenched my fists. I didn't have to guess who was behind it. Karen was lashing out, but at this point, she had nothing left. She had lost her power, her influence, and soon her home. Because without her illegally funneled HOA funds, she wouldn't be able to afford her expensive lifestyle anymore. But I wasn't about to let her get the last word. The next morning, before I even had a chance to clean up the vandalism, something incredible happened. The community showed up. People, neighbors, regular customers, even folks I barely knew, arrived with cleaning supplies and paint remover. "We saw what happened," one woman said, scrubbing away the hateful words. "We're not letting her win." Another man handed me a cup of coffee and clapped me on the shoulder. "You stood up to her when no one else would. It's about time she got what she deserved." It was overwhelming. For months, Karen had done everything in her power to isolate me, to turn the neighborhood against me. But in the end, she was the one who ended up alone. By noon, the restaurant was spotless. And that night, We had our busiest dinner service yet. Karen, meanwhile, was spiraling. With the election results under review and her finances being audited, she found herself under investigation. Turns out, embezzling HOA funds is a serious crime. When the board officially confirmed that she had been misusing money for personal expenses, they did more than just remove her. They sued her. And suddenly, Karen had real legal trouble on her hands. She tried to fight it, of course. She screamed, threatened, and even attempted to file a defamation lawsuit against me. But that backfired spectacularly when her own financial records, the ones she never expected anyone to dig into, were submitted as evidence. Not only was the case thrown out, but the HOA's lawsuit against her gained even more traction. And then came the final blow. The bank foreclosed on her house. Without her HOA connections to keep covering her tracks, Karen couldn't keep up with her mortgage. The neighborhood, the one she had spent years trying to control, watched as the bank repossessed her home. And just like that, Karen Whitmore, once the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was gone. Months passed. My restaurant thrived. The smear campaign, completely erased. My online reviews, better than ever. The neighborhood, finally at peace. But one day, as I stepped outside after locking up for the night, I spotted a familiar figure on the sidewalk across the street. Karen. She stood there, watching, her posture rigid. She looked different. Gone was the polished, smug woman who used to parade around with self-importance. She looked tired, worn down, like someone who had finally realized she had lost everything. For a moment, I wondered if she'd say something, a final insult, a last-ditch attempt to regain control. But she didn't. She just turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. And that was the last time I ever saw her. Life moved on. The restaurant became more than just a business. It became a staple of the community. People who once feared HOA retaliation started speaking up more. The new HOA leadership actually worked with the neighborhood instead of ruling over it. And me? I finally had peace. No more Karen. No more battles. No more threats. Just the steady hum of a thriving restaurant, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, and the satisfaction of knowing that, in the end, I won.